Viewers, hello and welcome to this special edition. The war has extended into week 2. The Iranians are showing no signs of letting up. The Israeli and American campaign seems to be stuck in a war of attrition, in a battle of attrition. Many people are thinking that this could lead to another situation like the Russians found themselves in Ukraine, a war without end. That itself, of course, is a debate because everyone has an opinion on whether the Russians are actually stuck or they're making progress. And many people believe that the debate will continue even when it comes to this particular conflict. The other big questions that are being posed are by US allies and partners, increasingly restive, increasingly depleted, finding that perhaps the costs of war are not what they anticipated. And if this does turn into a cost-prohibitive conflict, where do they stand? Have they been sucked into someone else's war? Was Trump prepared? Did he actually game theory the outcomes? Did the United States anticipate the pushback from an Iranian regime that is hell-bent on surviving? And what after? These are some questions that are being asked of the Americans, but that doesn't stop us from asking these questions of our panelists. And I'm joined by some splendid guests this afternoon. I have Tatiana Kukureva, who's a senior Russian journalist and an expert on foreign affairs who comments very often, and you've seen her on our shows here, CNN News 18. We also have with us Derek Grossman, professor of international relations at the University of Southern California, who I hope will hold up the American end of this conversation. And we have with us Patrick Kugil, chief analyst of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you very much, all of you. Let me start first with Tatiana Kukureva, because I know that she will set up this debate. Tatiana, do you agree that perhaps the Trump regime did not see the consequences of their actions, or that they don't really have an end game in mind?
Absolutely not, Rahul. And first of all, let me comment on hearing the words American and regime on the same sentence. You know, even if it's a Trump regime, still, you know, music to my ears in some ways, more ways than one. But also, you know, we know that this campaign was months in the making. We can be sure of that. I mean, both Donald Trump and actually Benjamin Netanyahu has said that, you know, well, we decided on the phone. Of course not. I mean, campaigns like this take months to prepare. We saw American ships pull out from the Gulf, you know, so we know they were preparing. We also know that, we can assume, I'm sure, we don't know because, you know, it's difficult to know with Iran. But we can assume safely that Iran had been preparing for this. You know, we're seeing a response, and it doesn't look like just, you know, a barrage of uncoordinated attacks. They're very, it feels like there is a strategy to what they're doing. And also, again, assuming that that was some sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing, it kind of is based on the idea that Donald Trump is extremely impulsive, which he's not really, not if you listen to what he's actually saying. And there's also the Israeli side. Mm-hmm. You know, having lived in Israel, having worked with the Israelis, you know, there's a very clear, and we had the privilege of listening to Israel's foreign minister yesterday. There's a very clear message that they're sending, and it's once you sift through the surface level of the narrative being that, you know, we are doing the effort, but the regime change has to come from Iranian people. At first, it kind of, it looks logical because we're talking about democracy and all things good. But essentially, that absolves Israel from any sort of responsibility for the said endgame, which means that they're not looking for a regime change, really. From the Israeli standpoint, you know, and they do perceive that as an existential threat.
Right.
It's more about weakening Iran, not even the government, not even the regime, if you will. it's about weakening them, pushing back the effort to obtain a nuclear weapon, because when you live in this war kind of mentality, which Israel does since its inception, because it's been at war with, or rather its neighbors have been at war with it, it depends on which side you're looking from. You do not think like 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead. It is about pushing back the work on the nuclear weapon. For the American side, and I'm not sure if my fellow panelists will agree, I think it is about money.
It's about money.
Absolutely.
Okay. What are the objectives then?
Well, thanks for having me, and it's very unfortunate that we have to have this conversation. The objectives are very unclear. I can sit here right now and give you at least 10 different potential objectives, and none of them would necessarily make sense.
So let's list them.
Well, I could list a bunch of them.
So academic
So
exercise.
one of them is regime change, right? So Trump was unhappy about the protesters being executed and warned the Iranian regime not to execute anymore. Otherwise, the U.S. would respond. And he said very publicly, "I have your back," to the protesters, right? So that's, and he hasn't really had their backs as far as we could tell. All right, so that's one explanation. Another is oil. We saw that during the Venezuela operation in January, that we got our oil back, right? Well, we know Iran pumps a lot of oil. That oil is under sanction. I think President Trump would like to have that oil in our inventory so that gas prices will go down even further.
So that's
That's
Tatiana's
exactly
money
Okay,
point.
so that's
Okay.
that's
Part
part
of
of
it,
that's
yeah.
part of money, right? Another reason I think is because after kidnapping Maduro in Venezuela, Trump had some momentum, had some pep in his step. Well, I could use the military to do all sorts of things. Maybe I should use it even more, right? It's winning begets winning in a way, right? Another aspect of this is Trump always chickens out. Taco, I'm sure you've heard that.
Right,
Everyone's
yes,
heard
we
that.
have, we have, yeah.
And
Yes, we
so
have.
in order to build an anti-taco narrative, sometimes you actually have to push that little red button. So,
No,
you know,
not the red button yet.
and we haven't even talked about the
Are you saying he's so impulsive that he would fall for, or his ego is so big that it would be bruised by an acronym?
Oh, absolutely.
four-letter acronym.
100%. 100%. I mean, if all you have to do is watch them in one day and you can tell, or 1 hour, or even just a few minutes, and you can see that everything is highly personalistic, everything is a personal slight. And I mean, we haven't even talked about the Israeli angle
So, Derek,
yet.
there is nothing redeeming about this campaign. Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, there must be something.
Well,
I mean, he must have a beating and bleeding heart. He must love the Iranian people that he wants to save from these absolute, oppressors.
Well, so
authoritarian ayatollahs.
when you look at the second Trump administration's foreign policy over the last year or so, the idea of supporting values worldwide has been totally tossed out the window. We are now not in the business at all of supporting democracy, freedom, liberty, human rights, any of that stuff.
But were we
are-
ever?
Well, no. Was the United States ever? Was that what you? I think
No,
we
I mean,
were
the
at certain
world.
times.
I mean, all the powers. It's not as if. I mean, look, you can have the veneer of enlightened diplomacy, but at the end of the day, when you really peel back the patina, you see the naked motives. I don't believe anyone has intervened anywhere in the world in defense of really strong values, to be honest. Maybe in the Second World War you could make that point, but I didn't see the Americans leaping out till Pearl Harbor happened.
Well, I think we.
So-
I think we at least used to talk about values as something that was important to us, but also important to, and now you're going to hate me when I say this, the liberal rules-based international order. I know here in India, not a popular topic, right? Did this rules-based order or liberal rules-based order ever exist? We can have that debate. But after the end of World War II, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviets decided that, yes, there is going to be a rules-based order, right? And so that has been completely shattered. If it hadn't already had a lot of cracks in it prior to Trump, now it is shattered, right? And it's just kind of a new paradigm. And oh, by the way, I didn't even mention trying to get Iran to stop enriching uranium, stockpiling uranium, to get it to eliminate its ballistic missile arsenal. All of these things are additional potential objectives, right, in going to war with Iran. And frankly, with so many objectives out there, right, it's really hard to make heads or tails of anything. And so my assessment of it is that it's too muddled to really work in any way.
That is not the point of view that I was expecting, but I respect it. At the end of the day, that's his point of view. Patrick, do you believe that this particular activity that is being conducted, I don't know what to call it, because look, no one wants a repressive regime that exports terror around, let's be honest. But I don't quite believe that someone else from outside should have the right to decide. So let's for a moment assume what Tatiana was saying, that this was at the outset an attempt to try and weakening the regime in Tehran so that the people could find expression and do the needful. If you were to narrow it down to that particular objective, are we close to that objective 1 week into the war? Maybe it's too early, I don't know.
No, not at all. Yeah? If history is any teacher at all, we know that that kind of regime change from abroad and democracy support has never delivered desired outcomes. Yeah? We have been through this in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, and we actually must agree with a long-held Indian position on this, that democracy cannot be imposed from outside. It must be a homegrown process, yeah? and it should have been left to Iranians to select the leader. Maybe there are some other options how you can support pro-democracy movements and etc. But using bombs to liberate people is probably too far. And then in this sense, I might add one element to the list Derek made already. There's this geopolitical competition with China and with Russia. Yeah? So after taking out Maduro in Venezuela, Iran was easy next target. So this is maybe also about the weakening of this axis of Russia and China. First of all, to stop supply of oil to Iran, to eliminate a kind of ally and friend for China in the region. So this is probably one. If we can go away from these personalistic, egoistic motives and reasons, and we can try to find any strategic reason behind this war, that may be can be another perspective through which we can look at this, and we just need to remember that this war was long in the making. I can agree with Tatiana, but even extended much further. During the first tenure term of the Trump presidency, he was already quite close to decide on that some kind of intervention in Iran. Yeah? There was in 2018 or 17 or 19 even. I also remembered also Poland hosted a conference on Iran in Warsaw, which actually did not went as planned for the American administration, but there was some kind of preparations in the way. But then Trump's presidency ended. He did not realize this. He tried his long-term goal to take care of Iran, if we can put it this way. And last year we had a 12 days war. Probably it was still business unfinished. It was like first intervention in Iraq in 1990. Victorious for the US, but they did not take away Saddam Hussein, and then they came back in 2003. So this Iran case is probably one of the unfinished businesses for US and democracy building. I believe is not the main reason, because we know it is not working this way.
Well, it's interesting because you sort of focused on the money angle, but there are many people who say, as as Patrick was saying, that this could be a slingshot at trying to starve the Chinese of energy. And by extension, you have the Russians impacted too, because you're going to have an important source of geopolitical balance taken out. So do you see that actually impacting China in a way that is going to make China desperate, and by extension the United States, Russia?
Well, I think, first of all, we're a long way from desperate. If I'm not mistaken, the Americans have just admitted that they have no means, for instance, to repel the Shahed drones. So Iran has several things up its sleeve, and we go back to even the discussion of whether the US has enough missiles to actually prolong it to an extent where, because it has to be a serious impact for China to get desperate. So that remains, I'm afraid, to be seen. Especially in terms of the military capabilities, because for now, from a narrative standpoint, we have come to a situation, and it's very clear. It was very clear when the special military operation in Ukraine started, but it is more so clear now, because from the media standpoint, we've come to a war of slogans from both sides. If you look at the reports from side by side, from the Iranian side and from, for instance, the Israeli side, they contradict each other completely.
Right.
It is a war of slogans. So there is literally no source of information that would actually be verifiable. Specifically with Iran, because first thing they did, closed off the internet. We don't have the numbers. We don't know what's happening. We have a bunch of experts, specifically coming from the opposition, who they grew up in the West, who claim to know something that they cannot technically know, because they haven't been in Iran for years.
So we don't even know how much stockpile they
Absolutely.
have, of what they have,
Absolutely.
and where they have it. And
I mean,
so
with
on
all
and so
due
forth.
respect to the Israeli, intelligence, we heard in June last year, we heard that, okay, Iran is on its knees. We hit all of the facilities, but the facilities, the very next week, they showed us didn't show us the facilities, obviously, but the facilities were up and running.
No, so hang on. Let me come back to the question, because many people are alluding to this theory that China is the end point. Now, we know that Trump is going to be meeting the Chinese president very soon, and that's a slated meeting. And he wants to go there with something on the table, some leverage. Is that really why Iran has been knocked about?
That might be a leverage, because as well as we all do, that Donald Trump negotiates in a very specific way. We've seen it. His negotiations with Prime Minister Modi shocked the entire nation, I believe. But to argue my previous point, I genuinely believe that everything he's done so far is about the money. Even considering his negotiations with India, he eased up on the sanctions on buying Russian oil. So you're not sponsoring the war anymore,
Yeah, for at least
Suddenly,
a month.
yes,
Yeah.
because the objective, it was never about Ukrainian children. It was just as much as I believe genuinely he doesn't care about the protesters, because his concern is, and it should be, the American people. He wanted to sell American oil to India. He got his wish. He then wanted more oil. We all know how he got that wish. Now, what do we see with the oil prices? And guess which country doesn't necessarily, in that respect, use the Strait of Hormuz, and has a large, resource of oil that it just so happened to obtain this year by very special means, and that would benefit from it,
Okay, so Derek Grossman, this gentleman, Donald Trump, has decided that he's going to take down the world. I mean, if you were to extend that hypothesis, then everyone suffers. At what point do they turn around and say enough, or can they?
Who's they?
That's right.
Okay.
You're looking at Europe, you're looking at the EU, you're looking at perhaps countries like India, you're looking at China, you're looking at Russia, you're looking at several other countries, South Korea. Its markets are hemorrhaging. You're looking at the Gulf partners. Amazon facilities there have been targeted. Their oil is stacked up in cargo ships that aren't moving through the straits. And there's a possibility of they being constantly attacked over the next years altogether in acts of reprisal, which could be random but terrifying enough that their economies that are built on now a diffused future, not reliant on oil, suffer. So is a pushback going to come, or is America completely immune from all of this? They firewall themselves, they have their energy. Where does this go? I mean, is Trump out of control?
Yeah, so I think that pushback is already afoot, both internationally and domestically. Now, whether it will work, that is a different question to answer. But right now, internationally, you see China expressing very deep concern about not just Venezuela, but now Iran. I actually think that there is not an insignificant chance that China cancels the Trump's visit to Beijing later this month. They know that he desperately wants a visit, not just to negotiate, but for personalistic reasons, right? To show that he is a strong man sitting alongside Xi Jinping as a fellow strongman. And I think they're going to consider that possibility depending on what happens over the next few weeks. We've also seen the Russians now openly supporting Iran. We see Iran standing up for itself and saying we're prepared for a ground invasion. We see the Europeans taking on more of their own self-defense. The French, for example, are now going to have some of their military aircraft deployed with nuclear weapons aboard, so less dependent on the United States. India is in the process of negotiating with China, there's a thaw in the relationship, clearly. Some of this precedes Trump with the land border negotiations, but I think Trump winning the election and wrecking the relationship with India over the last summer hastened that development, that trend, right? So I think you're already seeing some international pushback, but at the end of the day, it's the domestic pushback that's really going to matter. So we saw the Supreme Court ruling on February 20th that overturned the constitutionality of Trump's reciprocal tariffs as a blanket tariff. So he can still do some other things, right? He can do 15% tariffs, blanket tariffs up to 180 days. He can do sectoral tariffs, things like that.
Sure.
But his power is much diminished now when it comes to tariffs. We see Congress taking votes on whether to limit the president's ability to wage war without a declaration of war from Congress. The two votes failed, no doubt, but by slim, very narrow majorities. So when you consider the midterm elections that are on the horizon this November, if the Democrats are to win one or both chambers of Congress, that can dramatically change the situation. You also see the MAGA base starting to fray, because MAGA is all about not just make America great again or America first, but not being led by the nose by other countries, right? And not getting into foreign wars, forever wars, those sorts of things. And Trump is walking right into that. My understanding is there are folks
I'm
within...
reading commentary that a lot of people are saying that Israel is sort of leading Trump up the garden path and so on and so forth, sort of suggesting that he knows no better and he's getting fooled by Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that what you're talking about?
I think that's the latest case, and probably the most prominent case. But the idea that the president is spending a lot or even most of his time on foreign policy in and of itself is an affront to the MAGA base, who think that he should only be focused on domestic policy and helping the working class that voted him into office, right? So and why is he doing that? Because the president, and it's not just Trump, but traditionally, the U.S. president has had wide latitude on foreign policy and national security, and they don't really answer to anybody unless Congress stands up or the people stand up. You know, there's a process that needs to take place in order for the restraints to come on, right? But in the meantime, the president can basically have a free hand on foreign policy, at least between now and the midterm. So I think what you're going to see is an intensification of that free hand. So what I'm telling you here, Raul and everybody, is that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Okay, that's okay. That's something that one doesn't want to hear. How worse can it get if you agree with him? How bad can it get before it gets better?
First of all, let me...
I mean, what could really go more wrong than it already is?
Always it can go worse, but maybe I'm more optimistic. Yeah? I think Trump can finish this war every day. They realized a lot of its objectives. So
okay, so you're saying that the
annihilated
off-ramp
many-
is... Okay,
Yeah.
so let me ask you this question, and I've got 5 minutes on the show. Let me go around the table. I'm going to ask you, where do you see this war headed? Is it going to end anytime soon?
First, I would like to recall an article, excellent article by Raja Mohan, excellent strategist, Indian strategist, in Foreign Affairs recently, titled, I think, The Illusion of Multipolarity. And he claims that we are still living in the unipolar world. And shortly speaking, Donald Trump is doing this because he can, and this is probably another explanation. So as long as he will be allowed to do this, he can continue along this path. There is a very easy off-ramp from this. Yeah? Trump just needs to save a face. He can declare victory. He attained some military objectives of the action. We've heard that radars and missile launchers are destroyed. So maybe that could be an excuse to declare the victory and go back to take care about the American voters. So I think we do not need to go further along this line. A lot will depend on the behavior of its allies in the Middle East, but also Europe has a role to play. Unfortunately, for now, Europe is kind of divided on this very issue, but it's leaning towards more assertive position towards the US. We would like to also to hear more clear position from India that is also not risking the wrath of Donald Trump at this very delicate moment. But I do hope that even living in the unipolar world, it matters what other countries has to say, and we as a friends of the United States, I think Europeans has a role to play, to somehow
pull him back from
to help make peace in this very strategic region of the world.
Okay, what about you? Final comments on where this is going, and will it end soon?
I do agree on the fact that he can end it anytime soon. And I think that with Trump, it's all about the perspective, it's all about the perception. So whenever the real objective, and I don't buy the regime change objective for a second, because we've seen America sponsor revolutions. We specifically in Moscow have seen America sponsor revolutions very close to home. We know how it's done. They know how it's done. They know we know. But at the same time, as soon as he can portray this, just as has been said, we've had objectives. We've hit, the ballistic missile program is years behind. The nuclear facilities are damaged. Whether we'll, know that it's not true, that's another story. I do believe that it also has to do with midterms. I think that he's going down a very familiar route, and he's sort of kind of saber rattling and showing him in a position of a strong man, kind of solidifies the support. And also, should America benefit from the current fluctuations of the energetic market, that would also ensure that the same working class actually gets somehow the support that it awaits from the president. In the meantime, the one thing I would disagree on is the notion about unipolarity, and this is, I think, very important. I think that as we step away from this binary perspective that something is right and another thing is wrong, because it genuinely doesn't exist in the real world, the Indian position is actually very clear, and it's a very strong one. We don't need to take a side.
Okay.
Not every day. Some things you just need to watch unfold.
Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was already said. I mean, Trump can end this war tomorrow, today, if he wants to. The question that I have, though, is, I mean, the law of unintended consequences, right? I mean, are there certain things that can't be put back into place because of the ill will and the destruction that's been wrought over the last few days? That's possible, but I think when you look at the signaling from the Iranians, they're ready to call it quits, so long as the U.S. and the Israelis stop the aggression toward them, right? And I think the Chinese and the Russians are advocating for that, and I think India is advocating for that, and most of the world is advocating for that. So I don't want to make this sound like a nice, neat little war, because it may not be, but I think over the next week or so, we could easily see a back to status quo ante.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. We've run out of time. We've had an engaging conversation, and we didn't know where time went. So I'll leave it at this. I'm closing without comment. It's for you, viewers, to figure it out for yourselves. Thank you very much for watching.